in the picture-perfect streets of Evergreen Estates, where every blade of grass had to be exactly 2.5 inches, and every front door had to be painted in one of 3 approved beige tones. I used to believe I had found peace. That illusion lasted about 5 minutes after I moved in. Because Evergreen Estates wasn't a neighborhood, it was a kingdom ruled by Patricia Whitaker, the HOA president everyone privately called Karen. She patrolled the streets in her golf cart like a dictator in pastels, clipboard in one hand and a fake smile glued to her face. "Rules keep us harmonious," she'd announce at every monthly meeting, her voice syrupy enough to rot teeth. But harmony, in Karen's world, meant no one dared to be different. I was Marcus Hale, 38, divorced, and the neighborhood's official scapegoat. My garage studio spilled paint fumes and canvas edges into the driveway, and my yard held 3 small abstract sculptures I'd welded from scrap metal during sleepless nights. Karen had cited me 6 times in the last year alone. First for visual pollution because my easel was visible from the sidewalk. Then for non-conforming yard decor when one sculpture caught the afternoon light. She even wrote me up for odor violation after she claimed the linseed oil made her physically ill. Each fine came with a letter typed on official HOA stationery, always ending with the same line, "For the good of the community." The community apparently didn't include struggling single dads trying to raise a son. My ex-wife Sarah had bailed 2 years ago, tired of living like artists and charmed by Karen's circle of perfectly manicured wives. She'd moved to the golf course side of the development and now co-parented Ethan with all the warmth of a tax form. Ethan was 7 today, my entire universe wrapped in freckles and wild curiosity. Karen had been working overtime to turn him against me. At her approved kids' events, she showered him with the latest drones and gaming consoles, then patted his head and whispered, "See, sweetheart, this is what real success looks like." Ethan would come home asking why Daddy couldn't buy him the same things. It sliced deeper than any fine, but I kept my mouth shut. I wasn't here to wage war in public. I was here to be the father Karen could never buy. For 3 straight months, after Ethan fell asleep, I locked myself in that garage and poured every drop of love I possessed into his birthday gift. Not a toy. A life-size charcoal portrait executed in the old Renaissance technique. Layered tones on gray paper. White chalk highlights. Every single detail captured from memory. The exact tilt of his head when he laughed. The tiny chip in his front tooth from his first bike crash. The constellation of summer freckles across his nose. I had stared at his sleeping face night after night, memorizing the curve of his cheek, the spark in his eyes that no camera could ever catch. This wasn't a drawing. It was my son's soul on canvas. That morning, I wrapped the massive piece in plain brown craft paper, the kind you buy in bulk at the hardware store. No ribbons, no glitter, just the truth. My phone rang while I was tying the string. Sarah's voice came through clipped and impatient. "Marcus, please don't be late to the clubhouse. Karen and the board have gone all out, magician. Bounce castle the size of a house. Everything. And please, for Ethan's sake, bring an actual present this year. Not another one of your projects." I closed my eyes, counted to 5, and answered quietly, "I'll be there, Sarah," with something he'll remember forever. She sighed the way she always did when I refused to play by Karen's rules. "Just don't embarrass us." I loaded the canvas into the truck and drove the 3 blocks to the clubhouse. The parking lot was already packed with shiny SUVs. The building itself looked like a miniature country club. White columns, American flags flapping in perfect synchronization, and a banner that read, "Happy birthday to all our perfect children, sponsored by Evergreen HOA." I stepped out carrying the wrapped portrait like it weighed nothing and everything at once. Ethan spotted me instantly and sprinted across the lawn, arms wide. "Dad, You came. His hug smelled like sunscreen and birthday excitement. I handed him the gift. This one's just for you. Buddy, open it when it's time. Before he could even touch the paper, Karen materialized like a bad smell in a cloud of expensive perfume. Her blazer was starched so stiff it could stand on its own. She clutched her ever-present clipboard like a shield. Marcus, darling, so glad you could join our little community celebration, she purred, loud enough for the nearby board members to hear. Ethan, sweetie, why don't you set Daddy's package over there with the real gifts? We've got some very exciting surprises from the board, things that actually spark joy. She gave a theatrical wink to her husband, a retired accountant who nodded like a trained seal. A ripple of polite laughter spread through the crowd. I felt the familiar heat rise in my chest, but swallowed it. I smiled the small, tight smile I had perfected over 2 years of HOA hell. It's fine. Ethan, go play. Daddy's not going anywhere. Karen leaned in closer, voice dropping to that confidential tone she used when she was about to twist a knife. You know, Marcus, we all admire your hobby, but the board has been discussing your garage situation again. Property values are dropping because of the creative clutter, as I like to call it. Maybe after the party, we can chat about compliance options. She patted my arm like I was a misbehaving child. I nodded once, said nothing. Inside, I was already counting the minutes until this farce ended and my son could see what real love looked like. The party swirled around us, kids screaming on the bouncy castle, the magician pulling coins from ears, parents comparing the latest HOA-approved landscaping apps on their phones. I stood there invisible, paint still under my fingernails, holding the one thing Karen's rules could never control. The afternoon sun beat down on the clubhouse lawn like it was personally invested in making everything sparkle for Karen's ego. Kids bounced in the inflatable castle that had been rented for only $3,000, board approved, of course, while a clown in a perfectly pressed polo twisted balloon poodles that somehow managed to look HOA compliant. I drifted through the crowd like a ghost, nodding at neighbors who suddenly found their shoes fascinating whenever I approached. They knew the fines. They knew the rumors Karen had spread about me being unstable and a bad influence on the children. No one wanted to be seen talking to the artist who dared to have visible creativity. Ethan ran back and forth between the gifts table and the pool, eyes wide at the mountain of shiny boxes. Karen had made sure every board member brought something extravagant. Her husband presented a remote control drone that cost more than my monthly rent. Another couple gave a 1,000-piece Lego spaceship. Each unwrapping brought oohs and ahs from the crowd while Karen stood nearby, beaming like she had personally invented childhood. See, Ethan, she cooed every time. This is what a strong community provides. Structure. Quality. Not well. You know, her eyes flicked toward my plain brown package leaning against the far end of the table like an unwanted stepchild. I stayed silent, nursing a lukewarm lemonade from the approved beverage station. Inside my head, the voices were louder. I remembered the last board meeting when Karen had stood at the podium and declared, "We simply cannot allow artistic eyesores to drag down our standards." Think of the children, the same children she was now using as props. My sculptures in the yard weren't hurting anyone. They were the only color on my block. But color, apparently, lowered resale value. I had paid the fines because fighting her in court would have cost more than the house itself. So I endured. I observed. I waited. Sarah arrived fashionably late, air-kissing Karen like old sorority sisters. She glanced at my wrapped canvas and gave me the same weary look she perfected during our divorce. "Marcus, please tell me that's not what I think it is," she muttered under her breath. "Ethan is 7. He wants things he can play with, not hang on a wall." I met her eyes calmly. "He'll play with it in his imagination every single day. That's worth more than plastic." She rolled her eyes and drifted back to Karen's circle, laughing too loud at some joke about those poor souls who still think art pays the bills. The magician finished his act, and the board announced it was time for the main event, present opening. Ethan climbed onto the throne-like chair they'd set up under a rented canopy. Karen positioned herself front and center, clipboard tucked under her arm like a scepter. "Let's start with the board gifts first," she announced, voice carrying across the lawn. "After all, we want to show our children what real generosity looks like." One by one, the expensive boxes were torn open. The drone flew over the crowd while parents clapped. The Lego set earned gasps. Each time Karen clapped the loudest, turning to the audience with that practiced, humble brag smile. "We do this for the community," she repeated like a mantra. "Rules and gifts both keep us strong." I stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching my son's face light up at each new toy and then flicker with something else, guilt. Maybe when his eyes drifted to my plane package. He knew I couldn't compete with their money. But I wasn't competing. I was giving him something they could never wrap in a box. The afternoon dragged on in a haze of forced laughter and Karen's constant commentary. She even pulled Ethan aside at one point for a photo op with the board, whispering loud enough for me to hear. "See how much we all love you. Sweetheart, this is what a real family feels like." My hands clenched at my sides. I counted breaths. I reminded myself this was for Ethan. Finally, after every shiny gift had been opened and the crowd was starting to look bored with perfection, Karen turned her attention to the last item on the table. She picked up my wrapped canvas herself, holding it high like a piece of evidence in court. "And now," she announced with that booming, condescending laugh she reserved for special occasions, "let's see what our resident artist has brought this year." Another little doodle. "I'm sure. Ethan, darling, unwrap it so we can all appreciate the effort." The crowd tittered. Sarah looked mortified. I kept my face neutral, but inside something ancient and patient was stirring. This was the moment I had waited for. Ethan took the package with hesitant hands, the brown paper crinkling under his small fingers. He glanced at me once, eyes uncertain. I gave him the smallest nod. He tore the paper slowly at first, then faster, the crowd leaning in with the same dismissive curiosity they reserve for garage sale finds. The wrapping fell away. The canvas stood revealed under the bright afternoon sun. The laughter died in Karen's throat like someone had flipped a switch. The entire backyard, 50 perfectly dressed neighbors, the board members with their golf tans, even the magician holding a half-twisted balloon, went dead silent. No one had expected what they were seeing. They had come prepared for another clumsy kid drawing, something they could politely pity and then forget. Instead, they were staring at a life-size portrait that didn't just look like Ethan, it was Ethan. The charcoal captured the exact way his hair fell across his forehead after a day of running around, the tiny scar on his chin from last summer's fall, the intelligent spark in his eyes that only a father who had watched him grow would know. It wasn't cute. It was hauntingly real. Ethan reached out one small finger and touched the cheek of the boy in the drawing. "Dad," he whispered, voice full of something too big for a 7-year-old. "It's me. It's really me." The reverence in that whisper cut through the silence like a blade. Karen stood frozen, clipboard dangling forgotten at her side. Her perfect smile had cracked. For the first time in years, the woman who ruled our lives with fines and fear had nothing to say. That was when Mr. Reginald Caldwell stepped forward. He was a quiet older gentleman who had moved into the neighborhood 6 months ago, retired art appraiser. Everyone knew, but he kept to himself. No one had paid him much attention until now. He walked through the parted crowd with deliberate steps, eyes locked on the portrait the way a priest might look at a miracle. He knelt beside Ethan, ignoring Karen completely, and studied the piece for a long moment. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. My God, he finally said, voice low but carrying to every corner of the lawn. This is extraordinary. He looked up at me, and there was no pity, no condescension, only the pure respect of one professional recognizing another. The technique is flawless. Renaissance layering on tone paper. The emotional depth you've captured this child's soul. Marcus, this isn't amateur work. This is museum quality. Karen recovered enough to force a laugh that sounded like a hiccup. Well, of course we all support the arts here in Evergreen Estates. That's why we have guidelines. You know, to protect property values. Her voice cracked on the last word. Mr. Caldwell didn't even glance at her. He stood slowly and turned to face the entire stunned crowd. I've been collecting for 40 years, he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. I've stood in front of original Lucian Freud's and early Hockney's. This piece belongs in that company. Right here, right now. I will offer $50,000 for it. The silence that followed was different. It was the sound of jaws dropping onto perfectly manicured grass. $50,000. More than the brand-new luxury SUV Karen had bragged about donating to the HOA scholarship fund last month. More than most of the board members made in bonuses. Karen's face went the color of old oatmeal. Her husband actually took a physical step backward. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. I looked at Ethan first. His eyes were shining with a pride I had never seen before. He wasn't thinking about money. He was thinking about the fact that his dad had made something so beautiful the grown-ups were speechless. I turned to Mr. Caldwell and spoke clearly, voice steady. Thank you, sir. I'm deeply honored. But this piece is not for sale. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. But Marcus, think of the community. We could auction it for the HOA Beautification Fund. Her voice had risen an octave, the polite mask slipping completely. Mr. Caldwell chuckled softly. The piece stays with the boy and his father. And I suspect the real value here isn't monetary anyway. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a simple business card, and pressed it into my hand. The offer stands. And if you ever decide to show your other work, call me first. The art world needs to see this. The party was effectively over. Guests who had come to watch Karen perform now had front row seats to her public humiliation. They began making excuses, eyes bright with the delicious gossip they would spread tonight. Karen tried one last desperate save. She clapped her hands and forced a smile so brittle it looked painful. Well, what a wonderful surprise. We always knew Marcus had hidden talent. Perhaps we can discuss relaxing some of those garage rules at the next meeting, purely for artistic expression. Of course, the crowd gave her polite, pitying applause. It was the sound of her empire cracking. Ethan ran to me and threw his arms around my waist, the portrait leaning safely against the table. Dad, everyone's staring at your picture like it's magic. I hug him back, feeling the weight of 2 years of fines and mockery lift off my shoulders. Karen stood alone near the gift table, clipboard trembling in her hands, watching the guests drift away. For the first time, the Queen of Evergreen Estates looked small. The weeks that followed the party were a beautiful kind of chaos I had stopped believing was possible. Mr. Caldwell was true to his word. He didn't just offer money, he opened doors. Within days, my phone started ringing with gallery owners, critics, even a local museum curator who had heard the story through the neighborhood grapevine. My garage studio, once the subject of Karen's nightly patrols, suddenly became a pilgrimage site. Neighbors who had crossed the street to avoid me now knocked on my door with timid smiles, and I always knew you had something special eyes. I smiled politely and kept working. Karen, however, was not done. 2 days after the party, she called an emergency HOA board meeting. The agenda? addressing the recent incident and its impact on community standards. I showed up anyway, Ethan holding my hand. The room was packed. Karen stood at the podium in a new blazer, trying to regain control. "We must remember," she began, voice trembling with forced authority, "that while we celebrate talent, we cannot allow exceptions that undermine our carefully crafted guidelines. The garage situation remains a concern." Mr. Caldwell, who had quietly joined the meeting as a new resident, raised his hand. "With respect, Madam President, the only thing undermined here is the idea that money equals worth. That portrait proved otherwise." The room murmured in agreement. Karen's face flushed. She tried to pivot. "Of course we support the arts. That's why I've personally drafted a new proposal to allow one small sculpture per yard, under strict review." Naturally, the laughter that rippled through the crowd was soft but devastating. It was the sound of people finally seeing her for what she was, a bully whose power had always been an illusion. Ethan tugged my sleeve. "Dad, is she still mad about your picture?" I knelt down. "She's mad because the picture showed everyone the truth. Buddy, some people build walls with rules. Others build with love." He nodded solemnly. Clutching the small print I had made him of the portrait. 3 months later, the invitation arrived in thick cream-colored paper, a solo exhibition at Mr. Caldwell's private downtown gallery. The centerpiece would be the portrait of Ethan, still not for sale, now labeled priceless on the plaque. I spent the weeks leading up to opening night painting like a man reborn. The fines stopped coming. Neighbors started asking for commissions. Even Sarah called one evening, voice soft in a way I hadn't heard since before Karen's influence poisoned our marriage. I was wrong, Marcus, about a lot of things. I accepted the apology without gloating. Ethan deserved parents who could at least be civil. Opening night arrived like a dream. The gallery was packed with the city's art crowd, critics, collectors, and, uninvited but somehow present, Karen and the entire HOA board. They arrived in a cluster, faces fixed in that desperate, fawning expression people were when they realized they backed the wrong horse. Karen approached me first, voice pitched high enough for nearby guests to hear. "Marcus, darling, we are so proud of you. The whole board has been talking about how we always supported your artistic journey. In fact, we'd love to commission a series for the new clubhouse renovation, perhaps something that celebrates community harmony." I looked at her, really looked, for the first time without the weight of fear. The woman who had fined me for breathing now wanted to buy my soul, to rebrand herself. I spoke clearly, voice carrying. "Thank you for coming, Patricia, but you're no longer welcome in my story. The rules you use to control people don't apply here." I turned my back and walked away, leaving her standing in the middle of the gallery like a discarded prop. The board members shuffled after her, faces burning. Ethan stood beside me in front of the portrait all evening, wearing a tiny suit I had bought with my first commission check. At the end of the night, when the crowd had thinned, he looked up at me. "Dad, that lady Karen looked really sad when you said no." I smiled. Sometimes people have to learn that the most valuable things can't be bought with money or rules. Your picture taught them that. He grinned, the same grin I had captured in charcoal. "I'm glad it's ours forever." Outside the gallery, under the city lights, Mr. Caldwell clapped me on the shoulder. "You didn't just survive their nonsense, Marcus. You exposed it, and the art world is better for it." I looked back at the portrait through the window, my son's face glowing under museum lighting. Karen and her board had wanted to humiliate me with their perfect party and their perfect rules. Instead, they had launched the career I had thought was dead. The worthless doodle from a neighborhood failure had become the most talked about piece in the city. The final and sweetest chapter came 6 months later at the Evergreen Estates annual meeting. Karen stood at the podium again, trying to push through yet another set of stricter guidelines, this time banning any visible creative projects without board approval. The room was restless. Before she could finish her speech, several neighbors stood up. One after another, they cited the portrait story. If Marcus's art is good enough for galleries, maybe our rules are the real eyesore, one woman said. Another added, my kid wants to paint his bike now. Why should Karen decide that's against community standards? Karen's face went pale. She gripped the podium like it was the last life raft on a sinking ship. But the rules protect us all, she protested. Voice cracking. The vote came quickly. The motion to relax artistic restrictions passed 87-12. Karen's clipboard slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. For the first time in a decade, the Queen of Evergreen Estates had been dethroned, not by anger, but by quiet, collective laughter at her absurdity. I didn't gloat. I simply stood up, Ethan beside me, and thanked the room. I never wanted special treatment. I just wanted the freedom to create without being punished for it. Maybe we can remember that real community isn't built on perfect lawns. It's built on people. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was genuine. Even some of the board members joined in. Karen slipped out the side door before the meeting ended, her golf cart noticeably absent from the parking lot the next morning. Later that week, Ethan and I hung the original portrait in our living room, right where the afternoon light hit it perfectly. He stood in front of it every morning before school, touching the canvas the same way he had at the party. Dad, he said one day, that lady Karen tried to make everyone think your art didn't matter. But it did. It mattered the most. I knelt down. Exactly, buddy. Some people measure worth with money and rules. We measure it with heart. And heart always wins in the end. The last time I saw Karen, she was loading boxes into a moving truck. Her husband avoided my eyes. She caught sight of me walking past with Ethan, and for a split second the old condescending smile tried to surface. It failed. She simply turned away. No more clipboard. No more golf cart lectures. The neighborhood felt lighter without her shadow. Months later, my second solo show sold out in a single evening. Commissions poured in from across the state. Sarah and I found a new rhythm as co-parents, respectful, distant, but no longer poisoned by Karen's influence. Ethan thrived, his imagination no longer stifled by standards. And every time I passed the clubhouse, now featuring a small plaque that read, "Art is welcome here," I allowed myself one small, satisfied smile. The woman who had mocked my homemade gift in front of the entire neighborhood had learned the hardest lesson of all. You can control lawns and mailboxes, but you can never control the value of a father's love rendered in charcoal and truth. That simple brown paper package hadn't just been a birthday present. It had been a mirror, and when the HOA queen finally looked into it, she saw exactly what she was: small, ridiculous, and ultimately powerless. The neighborhood still has rules, but now they serve the people instead of crushing them. And somewhere in a quiet garage studio, a father and his son keep creating worlds that no clipboard can ever touch. That, in the end, is the real harmony.